The night Harper died, rain hammered the roads so fiercely that the paramedics could barely keep their bearings. The call came in at 2:13 a.m. They said he veered, suddenly, trying to avoid a deer. I've replayed that moment in my mind endlessly. Not the crash itself, but the silence that followed. That dense, suffocating silence that clamped down on my chest like a vice. I thought the worst part would be the loss. I was wrong. 3 days later, I stood at his funeral, my daughter's small hand clutched tightly in mine, her knuckles pale, her lips trembling. But what broke me wasn't her grief. It was the rows of empty chairs. No one from my family came. Not my mother, not my father, not even my sister. They were all at Carmen's anniversary celebration. I saw it later on a guest's live stream. Glasses raised, laughter floating in the air. My sister twirling in the same dress I'd once lent her for my graduation. And beside me, my daughter whispered, "Why didn't Grandma come?" That's when I realized this wasn't just about death. It was about erasure. And what comes after? I wasn't ready for that either. My name is Elaine. I used to believe family meant safety, that it was a place you could always return to. I don't believe that anymore. Before I begin my story, I just want to know you're here with me. Drop a listening in the comments or tell me where you're tuning in from. I love knowing how far these stories can travel. Sometimes even the smallest connection reminds us we're not alone. Thank you. Now let me take you back. It was a Thursday night, past midnight. Snow drifted down in slow, silent waves, blanketing everything in stillness. Elaine sat at the kitchen table, wrapping a small box in blue paper with a gold ribbon, Joanna's 9th birthday gift. Harper had messaged hours before. He was staying late after giving the keynote at a special education conference. "Save me some cake," he wrote, tagging it with that familiar winking emoji, the one that always made her smile. At 1:17 a.m., her phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Is this Ela Whitmore?" She knew. Somehow she already knew. Maybe it was the tone, or the way the whole world seemed to pause. Harper was gone. An accident on Route 18 icy roads. He hit a guardrail. The car flipped and landed upside down in a ditch. Gone on impact. No suffering, the officer said. She'd replay those words over and over, grasping for comfort in that tiny promise. Elaine sat in the dark, staring at the gift she'd just wrapped. In the next room, she could hear the soft breaths of her daughter, the occasional shift under blankets. She didn't go in, not yet. Instead, she curled up on the floor by the bedroom door, pulled her knees to her chest, and let the grief wash through her in shaking waves. When she finally opened the door, Joanna lay tucked under the covers, wrapped around Harper's old hoodie like it was a teddy bear. Elaine slipped into bed beside her, gathered her daughter into her arms, and pressed her face into the scent of laundry soap and innocence. She didn't sleep. At dawn, when the sky began to gray, Elaine reached for her phone again. Her fingers trembled as she dialed her mother. 3 rings, then the buzz of noise. Music, clinking glasses, laughter. "Hello?" NY's voice was bright, distracted. "Mom, it's Harper." Her voice cracked. "There was an accident. He's gone." "Oh, God," Nancy said, the line muffled by background chatter. "Elaine, sweetie, can I call you back?" "We're at dinner. Carmen's 10th anniversary, remember?" Elaine didn't speak. The silence stretched. "Everyone's here," Nancy added like that explained everything. "We've had this planned for months. You understand, right? It was like being punched while already drowning." Elaine cleared her throat. "Could someone come stay with Joanna in the morning?" "I need to go to the hospital. There's paperwork, identification." "I'll try," Nancy said hesitantly. "But tomorrow's the garden party. The mayor's coming. We've got the catering booked and everything." Elaine ended the call before her mother could finish. She drove to the hospital alone, waited in a beige room filled with fake plants and the smell of bleach, staring at a blank wall until a nurse gently asked her to come with them. They showed her Harper's body, still cold. Her knees buckled, and the only thing that kept her from collapsing was the hand of the head nurse, who instinctively reached out and held hers. Back at home, Elaine made all the calls. Funeral home, work, the school. Joanna was still asleep when she returned, the birthday cake untouched on the counter. The ribbon from the present had unraveled. Later that afternoon, while searching for Harper's insurance documents, Elaine opened the bottom drawer of his desk and found a folded piece of paper in his handwriting. Unfinished? Words scribbled like he hadn't meant to be interrupted. If you're reading this, then maybe the worst has happened. But you know what? You won't fall apart. You're not that girl I met all those years ago. You're steel now, and our daughter, she'll see it in you. Elaine held the letter to her chest like a shield. She sat at the kitchen table that night, lit only by the soft glow of the fridge light. Joanna was asleep again, this time from birthday cake and cartoons she didn't understand. Elaine stared at her hands, one clutching a soggy tissue, the other absent-mindedly scrubbing dried cereal from Joanna's bowl. Her tears fell silently. Later, as she walked Joanna to bed, she passed the hallway wall at her mother's house where a 10-year-old wedding invitation for Carmen still hung in a frame. There were no wedding pictures of Elaine, no family portraits that included Harper. It was as if, even in memory, they didn't exist. The snow was still falling, each flake a quiet witness. And for the first time since she could remember, Elaine asked herself, was this ever truly a family, or just a cast of people performing love? The sky was clear on the morning of Harper's funeral, clear. The sun pierced through bare tree branches, glinting off the frozen pavement as if mocking Elaine's grief. She'd expected more snow, more gray, something that matched the heaviness inside her. But instead, it was bright, chirping birds and blue sky. Wrong. All of it. Elaine stood beside Joanna at the entrance to the cemetery chapel, her fingers numb around the handle of the urn that held what remained of the man she had planned to grow old with. Joanna held the framed photo of Harper to her chest like a shield. She hadn't spoken much since the accident. Elaine hadn't pushed her. No one from her family had come. She had sent the notice. She had even called. Her mother had answered briefly, sounding rushed, and said only, "We're not sure we can make it. The anniversary party's still going." Her father hadn't called at all. Carmen hadn't texted. No flowers, no card. But Harper's world had shown up. Colleagues from the education conference flew in from out of state. Former students, some with children of their own now, brought photos, stories, and tears. His old grad school roommate flew in from Minneapolis. Even his first teaching assistant came, now a school principal, with his wife and daughter. The pews filled with people who had been moved by Harper's kindness. His belief in second chances, his maddening optimism. Elaine stood stiffly, listening as the minister spoke about a life well lived and the power of legacy. She nodded when expected. She smiled when people squeezed her hands. Joanna stayed quiet, her eyes dry and distant, standing just tall enough to rest her chin on the frame's edge, a little soldier made of glass. During the eulogy, one of Harper's friends, a woman named Margot, lifted her phone to record the music to send to those who couldn't attend. The screen lit up, casting a blue glow on her lap. Elaine's eyes caught the movement. There in full volume, a Facebook live stream flickered into motion. A patio strung with lights, champagne glasses raised mid-toast, laughter echoing through the phone. A banner in the background read, "Happy 10th anniversary, Carmen and Thomas." Elaine's chest tightened. Joanna turned and saw it too. They didn't say anything. They didn't have to. Elaine took the urn and walked out into the sunlight. The crowd followed her to the burial site where Harper's ashes would be laid. Beside a cherry blossom tree he had always loved in spring, there was a single wreath of pale lavender roses placed on the stone. Elaine hadn't ordered it. A small note tucked into the ribbon read, "The color of sunsets shared between father and daughter." She recognized the handwriting. It was Margot's. Harper must have told her the story, how he once stood on the deck with Joanna and told her that lavender skies were nature's lullaby. Joanna reached into her coat pocket and handed Elaine a tiny wooden box. The three of them on a hiking trip last fall, all wind-bee blown hair and lopsided smiles. Dad said this picture had to stay with the person who keeps going, Joanna whispered. Elaine closed the lid, pressing her lips to it. Her hand shook as she lowered the urn into the ground. That night, after Joanna fell asleep, clutching her dad's hoodie once again, Elaine sorted through the pile of mail waiting on the counter. Among the bills and sympathy cards from neighbors, She found an envelope addressed in her mother's handwriting. She opened it slowly. Inside was a pre-printed card with a stock image of lilies and gold. Foil script that read with deepest sympathy. No note, no name, no personal message, just the hollow gesture of obligation. Elaine stared at it. Then she heard the rustle of paper behind her. Joanna was folding something at the table. The card had been turned into a paper crane. Without a word, the little girl slipped on her coat, took the bird in her palm, and walked outside. Elaine followed. Together, they placed the crane at Top Harper's grave. Joanna didn't cry. She didn't even look angry. She simply whispered. He wouldn't have liked that kind of letter. Elaine crouched beside her and took her hand. For a moment, she felt like she was the child, and Joanna was the one anchoring them both. Later that evening, after Elaine put Joanna to bed and sat alone on the porch, her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from her mother's sister, Aunt Sheila. If you need someone in your corner, I'm here. I can't keep pretending like everything's okay. I never could. Elaine stared at the screen, her throat tightening. It was the first message in days that hadn't left her hollow. As the wind picked up, she looked toward the sky. No snow, just stars. She wrapped her arms around herself, thinking of all the things Harper would never see again, and all the strength she would have to find without him. And somewhere deep inside, a quiet reckoning began to stir. Maybe she had always been invisible to her family, but she wasn't alone anymore. 3 weeks had passed since the funeral. The snow had melted into slush, and the yard was a soggy mess of footprints and dead leaves. Elaine had just managed to clean out Harper's closet the day before, carefully folding his sweaters, setting aside the pair of hiking boots he'd always said were lucky. Every drawer felt like another goodbye. That morning, she was startled by a knock at the front door. Through the peephole, she saw her parents. Nancy wore a camel-colored coat and clutched a bouquet of white lilies. Douglas stood beside her in his usual gray wool suit, expression unreadable, and behind them in a red coat with lips painted to match was Carmen. Elaine hesitated for a moment before opening the door. Nancy stepped forward first. We brought flowers and lemon loaf. Joanna always liked that, didn't she? She smiled as if they hadn't missed the funeral entirely. Elaine forced a nod. Come in. The four of them sat awkwardly around the living room. Joanna, sensing something off, clung to her mother's side until Carmen coaxed her away. With promises of a game in the kitchen, Elaine kept her ears open, listening for any shifts in tone from the next room. Nancy leaned forward and touched Elaine's hand gently. We were thinking, sweetheart, maybe it's time to talk about finances, about Joanna, about what comes next. Elaine didn't respond. Douglas cleared his throat. You know, Harper, he wasn't officially your husband, right? I mean, legally. No marriage certificate filed. And Joanna being adopted complicates things. We just don't want you getting into any legal messes down the line. Nancy nodded as if that somehow softened the implication. Your father's right. A lot of the paperwork might be ambiguous. Elaine's eyes narrowed. Harper filed everything. We did it properly. We didn't need a wedding to be a family. Douglas gave a sympathetic shrug, the kind that always felt more like a dismissal. Well, even so, you might want our family attorney to take a look just to be sure nothing gets challenged later. Elaine didn't reply, but her grip tightened on the armrest of the couch. From the kitchen, she heard Carmen's voice float in. Don't worry, sweet girl. I won't let anyone hurt you, not even your mom. Elaine's breath caught. That night, after Joanna had gone to bed and the guests had finally left, Elaine sat down at Harper's desk. She didn't know what she was looking for. Maybe just a piece of him she hadn't already held and wept over. But as she scrolled through his laptop files, something caught her eye. A folder labeled just in case, she clicked. Inside was a video, grainy recorded in the study. Harper sat at his desk, eyes steady on the camera. He looked calm, but there was a tightness around his mouth that Elaine recognized. His serious face. If you're watching this, then something's happened. I hope you never need this, but just in case, Elaine, I leave everything to you. My accounts, the house, my policies, and most importantly, our daughter, Joanna Lee Whitmore. She may not be mine by blood, but she is mine in every way that matters. Elaine pressed her hand to her mouth as tears welled again. The next file was a scanned copy of his will, signed and notarized. She recognized the pen he had used. It was still sitting in the cup on his desk, glinting under the lamplight like a quiet guardian. As she reached to close the laptop, her eye caught one more document, an old email exchange between Harper and her father. Douglas had asked Harper to invest in a luxury vacation property. Harper had politely declined, citing ethical differences. The tone from her father's follow-up was colder. Kurt Elaine could practically feel the resentment dripping from the screen. It all clicked. Harper hadn't just been an outsider. He had been inconvenient. He'd said no. And now without him, they thought the doors had reopened. Elaine turned back toward the fireplace, her eyes landing on the photograph. Sitting above it, one taken, last summer during their trip to Montana. It was the three of them, Harper's hair tousled by the wind. Joanna squeezed in the middle, beaming. They looked like a family, because they were. She thought of Carmen's scarlet lipstick. Harper had once said it reminded him of warning signs, arguments waiting to happen. And yet Carmen had worn it today, of all days. Maybe it was a message, or a quiet challenge. Elaine's hand drifted to the pen on the desk, the one Harper had always used. It felt heavy, grounded, solid in her grip. Just like him. She whispered into the stillness of the room. You knew. He hadn't only left her a will, he'd left a path. And now she saw exactly where it led. The message came on a wet Thursday, wrapped in polite language but cold in tone. Her mother wrote it, though Elaine could feel Carmen behind the words, formal, clipped, veiled in superiority. They wanted to talk about Joanna's future and proposed a meeting at Elaine's house. They wouldn't come alone. Carmen would bring her attorney, a Mr. Kingsley. Elaine didn't hesitate. She sent 2 messages of her own, one to Mitchell, Harper's lawyer, and another to Aunt Sheila. Mitchell brought legal strength. Sheila brought backbone. The living room was arranged like a quiet standoff. A long coffee table stood like a border. On one side sat Nancy, Douglas, and Carmen. On the other, Elaine, Mitchell, and Sheila. Joanna was curled on the rug, headphones on, sketching with colored pencils, or so they thought. Carmen walked in, polished as ever, in a tailored blazer and blush scarf, like empathy was something she could wear. Mr. Kingsley sat beside her, folders in hand, adjusting his tie with nervous precision. Nancy sipped her tea too slowly. Douglas stared at nothing. Mr. Kingsley cleared his throat. Thank you all for coming. We're here to ensure Joanna is getting the support she needs during this emotionally difficult time. There are concerns about Ms. Whitmore's ability to offer consistent parenting while dealing with prolonged grief. Elaine didn't blink. You're saying I'm too heartbroken to be her mother? He hesitated. Only that a more emotionally balanced environment might serve Joanna better right now. Nancy offered a soft smile. We're only trying to help, sweetheart. Then Carmen chimed in. Perhaps Joanna could stay with me for a while just until things even out. Elaine stood, walked to a cabinet, and retrieved a small USB drive. She plugged it into the television. You want to talk about what's best for Joanna? She asked. Then let Harper say it himself. The screen flickered. Harper's face appeared, tired but warm, familiar. The room fell still. If you're watching this, he began, I'm no longer here. And if anyone is questioning what's right for Joanna, let me make it plain. She stays with Elaine. She's the strongest person I know. She's the reason I believe in the idea of family. Everything I own, money, property, documents, belongs to her and to Joanna. No one else. He paused, his voice cracking just a bit. Joanna may not be my daughter by blood, but in every way that matters, she is mine. And Elaine? She's who I'd trust every single time. Silence followed. Carmen's mouth tightened, but she said nothing. Kingsley shuffled his papers, trying to look busy. Then from the floor, a small voice spoke up. Joanna stood, clutching a folded sheet of paper. Can I say something? Elaine nodded. Joanna unfolded her paper and began to read. Family isn't who feeds you, or shares your DNA. It's who holds your hand when you're scared, who listens when you need to talk, who stays, even when it's hard. That's what makes someone your family. She looked around the room. My mom is the one who does all of that, not anyone else. For a moment, no one moved. Mr. Kingsley glanced down. Nancy opened her mouth, but no words came out. Carmen's expression cracked. Mitchell stared at Joanna like she was the most courageous one among them. Then Sheila, quiet until now, finally spoke. "Do you remember when Harper was first diagnosed with his heart condition?" she asked, voice low. Nancy hid the test results. Said there was no need to worry the family. Said it might disrupt Carmen's schedule. Nancy paled. "I kept quiet for years," Sheila continued. "But Harper didn't get the care he needed. And that choice? That silence? It cost him his life." Elaine looked at her mother, who now sat without a word. And then fate added its own twist. Joanna's essay, shared with her teacher, was posted on the school's website with Elaine's permission. It spread quickly. By morning, thousands had read it. The comments poured in. Praise from strangers, support from families, even letters from therapists who called her the little truth speaker. Carmen, always the image-conscious entrepreneur, suddenly found herself silently featured, beside a viral essay titled, "Where Were You When I Was Grieving?" And in that living room, under soft lights, surrounded by forgotten photo frames and echoes of absence, truth stepped into the open, like sunlight through shattered glass. Only one family member's graduation photo adorned the living room wall. Carmen's, her smiling face in a gilded frame prominently displayed above the mantel. Elaine's pictures were missing or buried behind furniture. It had always been like that. But today, the narrative had shifted. Elaine didn't have to raise her voice. She didn't need to scream. She just let Harper speak. She let Joanna speak. And together they spoke louder than any accusation could. The courtroom was small, lined with wood paneling and flanked by dusty bookshelves. It smelled like time had stood still inside it. Elaine sat beside Mitchell, her hands cold but steady. The silver-gray handkerchief Harper once carried now clenched tightly in her palm. It was her armor, her anchor. Mitchell stood with quiet authority and handed a sealed envelope to the clerk. Then he addressed the room. "We are here to formally execute the last will and testament of Harper Lee, deceased," he said. "The contents are clear and legally binding." Elaine exhaled slowly. Carmen sat in the back row, arms folded. Nancy and Douglas were near the front, whispering to each other, exchanging glances laced with nervous hope. Mitchell read aloud, all monetary accounts, physical property, insurance benefits, and intellectual property rights are to be transferred solely to Ela Whitmore. A collective gasp cut through the room, Mitchell continued. Additionally, a trust fund titled The Belonging Fund is hereby created and reserved, exclusively for Joanna Lee Whitmore, to be held in trust until her 21st birthday. Ella Whitmore will serve as the sole trustee. Carmen's expression hardened. Douglas looked stunned. NY's mouth tightened as if she had swallowed vinegar. Carmen rose from her seat, walked to Mitchell, and leaned in. "I'll find another way," she whispered. "Don't think this ends here." Then she left the courtroom, her heels echoing like warning shots across the tile. But Mitchell wasn't finished. "There's one more item," he said, and pulled out another envelope. Harper left instructions to unseal this only if Elaine's guardianship was ever questioned. He opened the file and held up a set of letters, each signed, each notarized. One from Dr. Melinda Groves, a pediatric psychologist. One from Dr. Argent Khanna, Harper's colleague. And one from Principal Torres of Joanna's school. All testify to Elaine Whitmore's mental stability, emotional resilience, and exemplary parenting. Nancy looked like she might faint. Elaine sat still, calm as stone. But inside her chest, something warm pushed back against the cold. Justice didn't roar. It didn't need to. It whispered, and it stayed. When they left the courtroom, Sheila was waiting. She squeezed Elaine's hand. "I should have spoken up sooner," she said. "You've always been the one they overlooked, but you were never small." Days passed. Flowers arrived at Elaine's doorstep, signed from Nancy and Douglas with a handwritten card. "Can we meet Joanna? Just 15 minutes somewhere public." Elaine didn't reply. Then came an email from Carmen. "You might want to pay attention to Joanna's upcoming school evaluations. They're psychological in nature. Just a heads up." Seer Mitchell called that same afternoon. "Elaine, someone's quietly petitioning for a mental health review. If the court finds you mentally unfit, Custody could shift temporarily or permanently. Elaine's pulse spiked. Were the apologies just rehearsed lines? Were the flowers just props? That night, she took Joanna out for hot cocoa. On their way back, just blocks from home, the car shuddered. The brakes gave out. Time warped. The vehicle skidded across an icy patch and careened into a drainage ditch. It didn't flip, but it shook violently before slamming into the embankment. Airbags deployed. Glass cracked. Joanna screamed. Elaine's head banged against the window, leaving a bruise, but she was conscious. A neighbor called 911. The police said the roads were slick. It was likely an accident. But when the car was towed and examined, the mechanic found clean, deliberate slices in the brake lines. It wasn't the ice, he said. Somebody wanted this to happen. Elaine stared at the report in her lap. It was typed, impersonal, precise, unlike the quiet terror blooming inside her. Back home, Joanna said nothing. She went to her room, peeled back the corner of a drawer, and pulled out a photo. It was of the three of them, Harper, Elaine, and her, on a beach at sunset. She taped it to the headboard. That night, she left the lights on. Elaine stood in the doorway and watched her daughter try to fall asleep. The photo fluttered in the soft breeze from the ceiling fan. Something had shifted. It wasn't just grief now. It was war waged in silence, a battle cloaked in family names and gentle voices. And Elaine knew whatever came next wouldn't arrive with a warning. She turned back toward the kitchen and picked up the phone. Her voice didn't tremble. "Mitchell," she said. "We need to talk about protection now." It started with a tremble, a slight shake in Elaine's hand as she tried to button Joanna's coat before school. Then came the headaches, the strange metallic taste in her mouth, the tightness in her stomach that wouldn't leave. She chalked it up to grief, to the relentless stress of fighting for a life that once seemed so certain, until the morning she collapsed in the kitchen, her head inches from the tile corner. She woke to harsh fluorescent lights and the sterile scent of antiseptic. Machines beeped softly around her. Joanna was asleep in a chair beside her bed, fingers still curled around the letter from Harper, the one he never finished. A doctor leaned over Elaine with gentle concern. "You've been exposed to low-level mercury poisoning, likely over time. It's uncommon, but not unheard of." "Mercury from where?" When Mitchell arrived, face pale but calm, Elaine tried to piece things together. Joanna, too young to understand the chemical implications, only knew her mother was sick. She reached out quietly, desperately. She called Marcus. Within hours, Marcus was on a plane from Canada. While Elaine stayed in the hospital under observation, Mitchell began combing through receipts and house inventories. In Elaine's trash bin, they found empty tuna cans. Except Elaine didn't eat tuna, didn't buy it, no record in her purchases. That's when Mitchell's expression shifted. Carmen had previously ordered a pest control product, methylmercury-based, from a foreign vendor. The delivery address was wrong. Eithmore, a spelling slip too convenient. Delivered to a P.O. box rented briefly under a defunct LLC. At the same time, someone had filed an urgent motion in family court to suspend Elaine's guardianship rights, citing declining physical and mental stability. It clicked. They didn't need to kill her, just make her unfit. If Elaine was deemed incapable, guardianship of Joanna would temporarily pass to the closest legal relative, Nancy or Carmen, and so would access to the trust Harper left behind. Elaine lay awake that night, eyes tracing the shadows on the ceiling. The hospital room was divided, light on one side from a window, darkness pressing on the other, a reflection of her new world. Divided, dangerous. The next morning, she whispered to Joanna, still nestled beside her. "They want me gone without blood." "Just gone." Joanna said nothing. She reached into her backpack and pulled out the photo they always kept with them. Their family of 3. She slid it under her mother's hand and whispered, "Then we don't let them." That afternoon, Elaine was transferred to a quieter unit. But there, waiting by her bed, were 2 strangers, a woman in a navy blazer and a man in a therapist's coat. They introduced themselves as a CPS, representative and a hospital appointed, a psychiatrist. "We've received a report," the woman began. "It alleges that you've demonstrated harmful behavior toward a minor. We'll need a psychological assessment before you can return home unsupervised." Elaine's breath caught. Another trap. While Mitchell raced to file an emergency injunction, Marcus stayed with Joanna. He recorded a call, Joanna trembling. Hands barely steady on the phone as NY's voice played through the speaker. "No one wants your mom dead, sweetie. But if she can't think clearly, the court will let someone more stable. Help out, Carmen loves you. You know that recording along with toxicology reports and supply chain. Documents, Mitchell." Secured was enough to trigger a full investigation. The court moved quickly. Protective orders were issued. Elaine was granted an emergency bodyguard. Carmen, Nancy, and Douglas were legally barred from coming within 200 FT of her or Joanna. But it didn't end there. Marcus uncovered something deeper. Douglas, the man Elaine had once called Dad, had been the first person to try accessing Harper's insurance files after her death. Carmen had acted as the face, but Douglas was the one pulling strings. When Harper named Joanna as beneficiary and Elaine as trustee, Douglas saw his last chance at control slipping. He didn't need to own the money. He just needed a reason to hold it legally, temporarily. Elaine stood by the hospital window as snow began to fall again. Soft, relentless, a blank canvas. Her fingers traced the cold glass as Joanna slipped something over her neck. It was Harper's locket. Inside was a tiny picture. Elaine, Harper, and Joanna all grinning at a summer picnic. Joanna said quietly, "I don't need you to be perfect. I just need you here." Elaine bent down, forehead touching her daughter's. "This isn't over," she whispered. "But it's no longer just about survival. It's about truth." And truth, Elaine had learned, was a war worth waging, even against your own blood. Especially then. The evidence came in like falling dominoes. One by one, the files Marcus compiled landed in Mitchell's hands, each more damning than the last. There were receipts, cold and clinical, of toxic substances purchased under fake names, email exchanges between Carmen and Douglas discussing guardianship, opportunities veiled under a pretense of concern, illicit login into Harper's insurance accounts, traced directly to Douglas's IP address. Mitchell filed everything with the court, and this time the judge didn't hesitate. A formal criminal investigation was opened against Douglas. Carmen, as co-conspirator and accessory to concealment, was also placed under investigation. The courtroom, once a place where Elaine stood with trembling hands, now echoed with the crackle of truth. Nancy, summoned for questioning, broke down under the weight of guilt. Her voice trembled in the deposition as she whispered, "I didn't know it would go this far. I thought I was protecting what belonged to my own child." But that excuse no longer held power. Elaine sat quietly through it all. Not vengeful, not triumphant, just exhausted. She didn't press charges for emotional damages. Didn't seek monetary compensation. Instead, she filed a request to sever all legal contact between Joanna and the rest of the family until Joanna turned 21. The court approved it, without hesitation. D. Sheila, who had stood in Elaine's shadow her whole life, made a choice. She packed her bags, left the family that raised her in silence, and moved to a small cottage just down the road from Elaine's home. "You spent your whole life without anyone to lean on," she said one morning, handing Elaine a cup of tea. "Now let me be your friend in the years we still have." That same week, while cleaning out Harper's old study, Joanna found a letter. It had been folded carefully and tucked into the pages of a novel. Neither of them had opened in months. The handwriting was Harper's, the ink slightly smudged. "If you're reading this," it began, "maybe you're standing alone, but you've always been strong enough to raise both yourself and Joanna with your own two hands. Don't let the people who abandoned you teach her what love means." Elaine held that letter as though it were a flame she didn't want to burn out. It was added to her final guardianship filing. One last piece of Harper's intent made tangible. The judge accepted it as ethical testament. There were no objections. Mitchell gifted Elaine a framed photo of the three of them. Harper, Elaine, Joanna. The words engraved beneath it read, "Family isn't chosen by blood. It's chosen by what we refuse to give up." A week later, Carmen sent a letter. "No money request, no plea for sympathy. Maybe someday your daughter will forgive me," she wrote. "You don't have to. That's not your burden." Elaine folded it unread beyond the first paragraph and tucked it into a drawer. Not to hide it, just to leave it where it belonged in the past. A year later, the wind on the Oregon coast carried the scent of salt, driftwood, and a kind of healing that didn't demand words. Elaine and Joanna stood on the wet sand, holding the box together. Oak, smooth, simple, engraved with Harper's final words. Every breath with you was a page worth reading. This was the final promise, the last journey. Harper had always dreamed of opening a bookstore by the sea. He never got the chance, but he had always said this beach made him feel like time paused. Joanna read from his journal, her voice soft but steady. When you feel lost, Harper had written to his future daughter, look at the sky. I may not be with you, but the wind will still carry my stories to you. They opened the box together and the ashes joined the breeze. No tears, just the rhythmic crash of waves and the sound of hearts beating in quiet rhythm. Elaine tucked the silver handkerchief, Harper's favorite, into Joanna's coat pocket before they turned to leave. When you miss him, she whispered, just touch what he touched. They returned home quietly. Joanna began piano lessons. Elaine dug her hands into the soil and replanted the garden. Roses, hydrangeas, even the wild sunflowers Harper loved. Life didn't return to normal. It became something new. Then one day, a small parcel arrived. Inside was a childhood photo album of Elaine, one Carmen had kept. There was no signature, only a note. I've deleted all the articles. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want you to carry nothing heavy from us anymore. Elaine didn't respond. She placed the album in a drawer and turned the key, not as an act of resentment but of clarity. That chapter was finished. Joanna joined her in the garden that evening, dirt under her nails and wind in her hair. Mom, she said, when I grow up, I want to be someone people feel safe with. Elaine pulled her close, smiling through the ache in her chest. You already are. Some legacies are built in silence, not in bank accounts or houses, but in the spaces where trust is rebuilt, where safety is born, and where love doesn't have to be proven, only felt. Elaine had finally learned blood does not define home, but choice does. Sometimes what breaks us isn't the loud betrayals, but the quiet absences. True strength is not in fighting fire with fire, but in choosing peace even when the world hands you ash. And family, it's not blood. It's who stands beside you when the storm hits. If this story touched something in you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment, subscribe, or simply say, I'm here. Your presence means more than you,